Um, we'll start with some introductions. We'll introduce ourselves, me and Adhitya, and we'll also talk a little bit about like what the deferred MBA programs are and how it's different from a regular MBA. And then we'll go through some questions about the essay and we'll do Q&A at the end. But yeah, feel free to stop us at any point and interrupt. So I'm Abinaya. I'm originally from Chennai, and I moved to the US for my undergrad. I did undergrad at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, where I studied computer science and machine learning. I graduated in December last year, so it's been almost a year now. And I joined Google full-time in March. I learned about deferred MBA programs sometime last summer because during the summer, they typically have some information sessions at the schools that offer them. So I attended a couple of those last summer, but I never really thought I would apply until like December when I graduated. Initially, I was pretty scared to apply. It just seemed daunting to apply to an MBA program right out of undergrad with no work experience and nothing like super special. To put it that way. And I decided to apply in January. Usually, like the applications are due around March, but this year, because of COVID, the applications were due late June, early July. So that's when I applied. I applied to 5 schools in total. I applied to MIT Sloan, University of Chicago Booth, Wharton with University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, and Stanford. There are not a lot of schools that offer deferred MBA programs. I think this year there were like 7 in total, not more than 10. So definitely like do your research about like which universities offer this option. And yeah, that's my introduction. I'll let Aditya introduce himself too.
Sure. That was a great intro. I don't think I could do that, but I am Adhitya. I am from Chennai. I studied in Princeton, studied mechanical and aerospace engineering. I was always interested in entrepreneurship and also squash. So that's how I ended up in the US so that I could pursue both. It was very coincidental. And since I had like a technical background, I always knew that I have no idea what business is and I want to get a formal education in that. So that's why I decided to apply to deferred MBA programs, and I found out about it through Google, just by seeing if there were opportunities to apply early. So I knew that I wanted to do a deferred MBA program from the start. I applied to the same 5 or 6 schools: Harvard, Wharton, Yale, Columbia, MIT, and Stanford. And like Abinaya said, I think like it's a great time to apply to an MBA program when you're already like studying. The GRE, GMAT, and all of that is not too hard to do. But once you start working, you're probably like more busy and stuff. So it highly recommend. And I guess that's why you guys are all here. So we'll talk more about it.
Sorry, I'm muted. Cool. Thanks, Aditya. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about like how the deferred MBA program differs from a regular MBA. I think like at the time when I applied, I didn't know much about it, and I wish somebody had told me like that was a good thing to do and apply early, because a lot of people have hesitation about applying when they're not fully qualified and maybe they want to apply again. So I thought I'll talk a little bit about the program itself. So a deferred MBA program is something you apply for in your final year of college. This could be your undergrad or your master's. You apply to it before you have any sort of work experience, except like internships. Internships are okay, but you can't have any full-time work experience when you apply to the deferred MBA program. And once you graduate, you are going to get work experience of somewhere between 2 to 5 years, depending on the program. And then you'll join the MBA program full-time or part-time. I think some schools offer part-time too. So I think like the main advantages of deferred MBA programs, according to me, is one thing is the MBA itself is not binding. So the school could be binding. So for example, if you apply to a deferred MBA program at Harvard, you're not committing to do an MBA per se, because it's still like a huge sum of money. You want to still think about like whether you can afford it. But I think like some schools do ask you to commit that if you do an MBA, you'll do it with them. So if you get into Harvard early and you want to do an MBA in 2 years, they ask you to commit that you'll do it at Harvard, which I think is pretty reasonable. But the MBA program itself is not binding. So you can decide that an MBA isn't for you. You'll just lose the deposit. And two, letters of recommendation from work. This is a question I've got a lot, especially like if you're in a line of work that doesn't really need an MBA. For me, I'm a highly technical person. My undergrad, yes, I'm doing machine learning at Google. And in that technical path, an MBA doesn't often like just fit. So a lot of people have hesitation asking for letters of recommendation from work because it kind of indicates that you're going to like take a break for 2 years from the technical industry and maybe even move out and like switch roles. So the interesting thing about a deferred MBA is your letters come before you start full-time work, right? So they come from your internship managers, your professors at college, somebody you did research with, nonprofit you worked at, things like that. So if that's something that makes you feel more comfortable, I'd highly recommend applying to a deferred MBA. And the third thing is you have a higher chance when you reapply. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but in a regular MBA program, if you apply once and you apply again, they know you reapplied. So the main thing they're looking at in your application when you apply like 2 times to a regular program is what changed since the last time you applied. Like, what did you do in 2 years that we rejected you before and we want to take you in now, right? So you have to have a very impressive 2 years. But the difference is in a deferred MBA program, you don't have any work experience when you apply, right out of undergrad. So in 2 years, the difference, the like big difference in your life is you actually have work experience. So there's not much. There's not much to justify like why you're reapplying. You're reapplying because you now have work experience and you're much more qualified for like a business degree. I know a lot of schools have higher admission rate when you reapply if you didn't get it the first time, because it kind of shows the commitment to that school. Like she applied 2 years ago, she didn't get it and she's trying again. So she really cares about it. And finally, like Adhitya said, your GMAT and GRE is much easier to take when you're right out of college. Like everything is like fresh in your mind. They're pretty like difficult exams. You have to prepare for them. And when you're working, it's harder to do that on the side or the weekends, etc. But now everything is in your mind. The math will be pretty easy. And you can just get it out of the way. And a score like is valid for 5 years. So even if it doesn't work out with them, always like apply using the same score for the regular MBA program. The caveat is maybe it's like a little bit harder to get into the deferred MBA program. Not a lot of people apply. I think the acceptance rate by itself is like pretty much the same. Approximately percentage-wise, it's like around 10%. But it's definitely like pretty competitive to get in early, and you want to like plan for that and make sure you have a strong application. I see a question. Role of GPA in getting. So what is the role of GPA in getting the application approved? GPA is more of like it's like you have a good GPA and that doesn't affect your application much above like a filtering stage. So it's just like you need to have a reasonable GPA and then we'll look at the rest of your application as a whole. But that being said, it doesn't mean that if you don't have a good GPA, you have no chance of getting into an MBA program. Definitely, it's like a whole package. GPA is just like one part of it. But when lots of people apply, like it could be used as a cutoff. So it's no part of the application is like make or break. Definitely, if you have a poor GPA, you can like justify it with the rest of your application and explain why that's the case. But yeah, it doesn't like affect your application as a whole too much. Adhitya, do you have something to add to that?
No, that was very comprehensive. And I would just say, why not? You have the flexibility of going anytime between 2 to 5 years, which is a big deal. Like, you know that in your back pocket, you can always do an MBA. And if you don't get in, like you can always apply again. So if you're really thinking about doing an MBA, there's just really no downside to applying early. It's not going to hurt you in any way. And if you get in, it's going to help you a lot. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I see some more questions. I'll take them as I'm receiving all your questions. We'll as the session goes by, because maybe we're going to talk about it. Yeah, so we did intros. Adhitya, you want to share a little bit about like your background and why you decided to pursue an MBA?
Sure. Like I said, very interested in entrepreneurship, and I've always wanted to do something in the intersection of technology and entrepreneurship. And I think pursuing an MBA for me made sense because one, it would give me a good business understanding, the finance and what it means to run a company. And two, doing an MBA is very good to meet people. You meet a lot of like-minded people who are interested in similar things, and you can work together and hopefully find co-founders. And lastly, it also is like a perfect like incubator space where you have all the resources of a university. You can get mentorship, you can get funding, and at the same time you have like very low risk. So you can actually take chances and try out a lot of different things. So that's why I just decided to apply for an MBA. And why Deferred? I think, like I said, the main reason was I knew I was going to do it. So why wait to apply? And if I don't get in, I can always apply again. So that's why I did it as a Deferred program.
Cool. Thanks so much for sharing that. And you said that you always wanted to do an MBA. Like, how long did you actually like spend on the application? Were you, do you think you were building it up, or is it okay to start a little bit late?
So I think there's a common misconception that you have to do a lot of things to get into a particular program. And I don't believe in that. I think it's more about telling what you've done in a really effective way. So I would try to steer away from ticking the boxes and doing A, B, and C just so I can get into some kind of program, but rather pursue what you're really interested in and then take like 4 to 5 months, I think, is an ideal period to like write out your application, study for your GRE or GMAT and all of that. And it's really important to tell what you've done and why you've done it and how that relates to what the degree is about. And for me, for example, like squash was a big part of my life. And I wrote about that in my essays. And I said that taught me perseverance, that taught me how to play as a team, and how these skills would like translate to when I do an MBA, I'd be able to work with other people and stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. So like Aditya said, it's not about like what you do in the 2 months while you're writing an application. The application is about like you as a person and what you did like over the years. So it's not like you keep writing the application for many years. The application could be like a month or two, but it's about what you have done over many years. So I got a question that says, as you mentioned, you decided to apply in December. How was your GMAT prep structured, considering you only had 2 months? So I'll talk a little bit about my GMAT prep. I only decided to apply in January. Like early January, I set my GMAT date to be mid-February, mainly because I had like a really short span of time to plan everything. And to me personally, at the time, I wasn't really sure whether I should apply or not because I wasn't sure of an MBA. I knew I wanted to do an MBA because I wanted to get like non-technical skills, and I wanted to learn that formally. And I thought that would be like a nice complement to my role that's like super technical, because like as you go up in any career ladder, you're going to start like managing people, and people skills like play a major part. And then long term, I'm also thinking about like whether I want to start my own company and that sort of thing. As Adhitya mentioned before, like the MBA program has like incubators, and they like really support you with that. So so I kind of like knew I wanted to do an MBA, but I wasn't sure whether I wanted to apply early because I didn't know if it was like super competitive and whether I even had the skills to apply. But that being said, like I prepped my GMAT for around 1.5 months. I think that was ample time, but the caveat is I was at home during this time. I graduated in December. I started full-time work in March. So like from January to March, I was at home. I had all day, and I prepared for GMAT pretty seriously. I bought all the official material. I bought like I used Magoosh for their like verbal videos. So I did all of this material as comprehensively as I could by February. And the GMAT went well for me. And I think like 1 month-ish is like pretty ample. It depends on how much time you have to spend. If you're like full time at school and you only have the weekends, that might change things up a little bit. You might have to spend a little more time. But yeah, I think like around 1 month should be good. Aditya, or the GRE, do you think it's similar?
Yeah, I think maybe it'd be helpful to take you through the whole process of the application process, since there seems to be a lot of questions there. The first part was the GRE, right? And I did it when I was in school. So we had finals and all of that, but I think it takes 2 months and you just buy the books and study for it. And there's a lot of materials online. The only caveat is just be very consistent with your effort. So try to put in an hour or even half an hour every day goes a longer way than like cramming everything in like 2 or 3 weeks and just studying on the weekends for a couple of hours. So what I did there was like studied an hour during the weekdays and took a test every week for about 2 months. And all the material is available online and through the books. So I don't highly recommend like you would need external help for it. In terms of the timeline for applying, the essays take a while. So it's better to start earlier than later. And the more revisions you make on the essays, the better it gets. So, and it is a big part of the application process. And what I've noticed when me and my friends applied is when you're doing it without a pressure or without like a time crunch, you tend to do a much better job because you can review it many times. Like my essays, I think we went through like 10 revisions by giving it to family, by giving it to friends, by giving it to professors, and everyone would have comments on how to better it. And the last part is the recommendation letters is also another place where you should start early, because professors, you're asking them to write a nice letter for you, and when they're doing it under a time crunch, they don't tend to be as personalized as they can be. So it's just better to give them a heads up. I told my professors 4 months in advance that I would need something in the next 2 months, and 2 months before the whole applications, I just asked for it, and they were totally fine with that part.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything he said. I also like told my professors well in advance that this is something I plan to do. My professors actually told me, reach out to me with at least so much, like 1.5 months time. So like, even if I'm having some busy work, I will try to fit your stuff in. So like after I prepared for, like GMAT was like my way of kind of judging like where I stand, like whether if I had a very poor GMAT score and I had to like retake it, then I think I would have been a bit more worried. So somebody asked me my GMAT score. I got 760 out of 800 on GMAT. That's 99 percentile. GMAT has like 3 sections. So there's like an 800 score, there's an essay score out of 6, and there's an integrated reasoning score out of 8, I think. I got a full score on the IR and the writing, and I got a 760 out of 800 on the exam. I think like GMAT and GRE are both like exams you can actually study for. I highly recommend doing all the official material because like the exam really has a pattern and there's a time limit, right? So like especially for the math, I think like it really helped me to do those kind of questions repeatedly over a period of time. Because then I got used to how the question looks, right? And because they have like standard question formats, I don't read the format during the exam because I already know the format. And that gives you a little bit of extra time to like, you're already adjusted. You look at the question and you're like, I know what to do. And you're also used to like common mistakes. I think the first time I wrote like a math sample paper, I wasn't doing that well. But in the final exam, I got like as much as you could get on math. So I highly recommend like practicing, and all the official material really helps. They even have like a writing tool that actually auto grades your essay for you. In the actual exam, I think they use like one auto grader and one human grader. But if you can afford it, I recommend that you buy all of these official material. There are practice exams. GMAT is like an adaptive exam. Your test gets harder as you go through the exam. So if you get the first question right, your second question will be harder. And if you get the first question wrong, the second question will be easier. So there's actually a lot of stuff that goes into like an adaptive exam. You can read more about it online, but I highly recommend that you prepare for it. And I also have a question that says, how important is GMAT? Adhitya, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, sure. That was the part I really wanted to stress upon. The GMAT and GRE score is like a minimum cutoff. So it's important. It's going to give you your interview opportunity, but it's not going to decide whether you get into the college or not. So it's definitely the first step. So if you don't get through that, you're probably not going to interview, but it's not the all of it. So you have to think of it as like part of the process. Someone asked me what my score was. I got a 335 in the GRE. I wrote the GRE because I maybe thought I might do a master's as well, since I was very interested in technology, but that didn't end up happening. But I got a 335. I bought the Princeton Review and the official ETS book, and that's all I used, and like some online test papers. I am not a great student, and this whole thing was very formulaic. So the verbal part for me was the hardest part, and I just used flashcards. I had to memorize vocabulary, and a lot of it you'll never use in your life, but it's the exam, so you have to take it. The other part is the time part. So the math was relatively easy for me, but where I struggled was keeping up with the time and also doing it. So like Abinaya said, it's very, very form-like, and you just have to keep, through repetition, you get better at it. Where like you start identifying patterns even before you read the question once you do enough of it, because it's almost the same thing every time. Is there any advantage of taking the GRE of the GMAT? For the MBA, no. Most of the top schools, they don't prefer one or the other. They're fine with the GRE or GMAT. But I know some schools that look for just the GMAT, and this used to be before 5 or 10 years, they only used the GMAT, but now they accept the GRE. The only advantage is, I guess you can apply to other programs as well. With the GMAT, you are restricted to just the MBA program, but with the GRE, if you decide that you want to do a master's or you want to do something more technical, you have that flexibility as well. Yeah.
Cool. And I'll take one more question before we talk about essays. What sources apart from OG, I think OG means original guide, helped you, but correct me if I'm wrong. So I used the OG should be official guide. I did the official guide. I actually needed to prepare for verbal more than I did for quant. For quant, I only did the 6 official practice exams that were on the website. I didn't do anything from the guide. I learned the pattern, and then I told myself, don't make careless mistakes, and I did the practice exams one every week. But for verbal, I did everything. I did the official guides verbal. I did the verbal guide. I did advanced questions in verbal. I did extra questions in verbal, all of which are on the official MBA website. I also bought the writing tool 2 times and practiced 4 essays before the actual one. I highly recommend it. I can't stress on this enough. When I bought it, I was like, this is $30 for me to write 2 essays. It's really not worth it. But my essay score jumped to a full score because of the $30 I spent on the writing tool. So highly, highly recommend it. If you can afford it, buy it. Because even the essays, right? You wouldn't think of this, but it's like a pattern. Somebody sent me how to write a good GMAT essay. It basically tells you the kind of words and the structure that the autograder is looking for. They have a standard pattern, no matter what the essay question is. This is how you start the essay, this is how you end the essay, and this is how a paragraph start. So yeah, it's so I guess I'm going away from the original question, which asked what else I did. I bought Magoosh for their verbal video. If you are the kind of person who likes reading a book, I think the official guide has all the information. It has all the different kinds of questions and the rules that you need to follow. I don't like reading books. The book was too thick. So I just got the verbal videos and like watched it in video form instead. So it totally depends on you, but I think like the stuff on the official website is like good enough. What official website am I talking about? So you can just look online for like GMAT official resources. I think it's called MBA.com or something. Okay. Yeah, they basically conduct GMAT. They have a couple of resources on their website. They're all like official resources. Yeah, so just get those. Before I take more questions, we're going to pause and actually talk about essays. Adhitya, do you want to share your thoughts on like the essay and what you think is like good to highlight, just general advice?
In terms of the essay, so I think I really enjoyed writing the essay actually, because it's very introspective and each college has its own essay question. So first tip, don't have like a standard template and put it out to every college. It doesn't work. You have to put in the work to modify it, or at least like answer the question they're asking, rather than having like a general essay and like making small changes. So I wrote every essay from scratch for every university I applied to. And it was sometimes completely different for each school. In terms of a common question is, what do I need to do to get a good essay? I think it's important to highlight what you've done in a good essay, rather than doing things to get a good essay. And I can share like clear examples so that it's more tangible. Something I realized through the essays was I was involved in a lot of different things, and my main interest was squash, entrepreneurship, social work, like social entrepreneurship, and classes. So that's what I highlighted in my essay. So I talked about 3 examples in general. I talked about my squash experience and how that helped me develop as a person. I talked about my internships, where I worked in a startup. I didn't work in any fancy, well-known company. I worked in a startup, but I explained why I was very keen on working in a startup, because it gave me exposure to what it means to run a startup, and I got like a much better understanding of that it's not that glamorous. And the last part was I talked about what I did in college, outside classes and in classes. So academic work, I talked about engineering, like full-on engineering projects, because that's what I was interested in, and how I developed technical skills and how that I could use that during the MBA program. So if you notice, the pattern is don't use vague words, don't use big adjectives, have a specific example. Like I talked about, this is what I did. I built a robot, or I worked in this group. And then the second part is why you did that. So I would talk about what drew me to that. Why did I choose to do that? Because you always have a choice to do things. And the last part is tying it back to the MBA application. So how that has now made you somehow a better person, and how that's going to help you in your MBA application. And another thing I would really stress is write about 2 or 3 examples, write about things you've actually done a lot of work on and are really passionate about. So for example, I've helped organize blood donation camps, but I was just a volunteer there. And like, I didn't do anything meaningful there. So I never wrote about that in any of my applications, just because it would sound good, because that is not something I was like super passionate about. I was just a part of it. But I was part of Engineers Without Borders in school, because I thought it's really cool to build like water transportation systems for a small village in Peru. And I knew the ins and outs of that program because I designed it from scratch. So even when usually during the interview, they ask about what you write in your essay. And only if you have like in-depth knowledge and you're really passionate about it, can you speak to that in a really nice way. And in my interview questions, a lot of people ask me about squash, because it's not common that you write about a sport for an MBA application. But that is something that truly changed my life. That's what brought me to Princeton. That's what helped me grow as a person. So it was easy for me to speak about that and write about that. Another common question that we get is, do I need to have like many different things, or should I focus on 1 or 2 things? I think it depends on the personality. For me as a person, these were the areas I was really passionate about, so I wrote about those things. I know when I was talking to Abinaya that she's very interested in women in tech and technology in general. And I'm sure she can speak more to that. But it is fine if you just write about one or two things and you're very, very passionate about it. So the idea is to be very genuine, talk about past experiences. Don't try to avoid talking a lot about this is what I would do rather than like this is what I did. So it's better to stick to past examples, what you've done in school, what you've done in high school, rather than if I got into the program, I would do this, because that's more a speculative thing rather than like a concrete example.
Yeah, plus one to everything Aditya said, especially what he said about write what happened in your past, not what you will do in the future. Because like schools are actually betting on your ability to become a leader in the future, but it's really based on what you've already done. Like everyone can say, I'm going to start a big company next month, right? But that tells me nothing about like your capabilities or what sort of person you are. But if you tell me for the past year, this is the market research I did for the company I'm going to build next month, that tells me a lot more about like your motivation, like how much effort you put into things, like do you think out all your decisions? I think a thing that MBA programs are really interested in is they want to see how you make decisions. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. It's what was the choice that was put in front of you. What option did you pick and why? I think they ask you this question a lot, both in like they ask it to you directly in interviews, but it's a great idea to put them in your essays. Like Adhitya said, talk about things you are really passionate about and things that will give you an opportunity to stand out, right? Like for example, like what you write in your essays will come up in your. So if you talk about, like, if you spent a paragraph talking about something, you don't have much more to say than the paragraph that was already in your essay, right? So if I ask you in your interview, hey, how was that thing you did? And you're like, yeah, I did it for 2 hours one Sunday last year. It's gonna seem like one paragraph in your essay is just like, right? Because you had like 4 sentences to speak about it. Versus think about something you did for like 2 years. You loved it, you learned so much from it, and you have so much more to do in the space. That's a great thing to bring up in your essay, right? Because like if I ask you about in your interview, that's like your space. That's where you shine. That's where you tell them like everything you did and how passionate you are about it. For me, that one thing was women in tech. I think like, so it's good to have like a complete like story in your essay, like where you come from, like what motivates you, and like how like it's affected your life and what you want to do about it, right? And for me, that story was like women in tech. When I did high school in India, I was in a male-dominated classroom. The ratio was like 47:3 in my high school class. And then when I came to Carnegie Mellon, in the CS class, it was 50% women. And I spoke about like what kind of opportunities that gave me, how it motivated me, and how it made me want to give back. And like I spoke about like everything I've done in the women in tech space, which also like encompasses leadership, and also like how I network, what matters to me, and how I overcome challenges and what kind of decision making is core to who I am. And that's like everything I spoke about in the essay. Like I spoke about like why this matters to me, because I come from a male dominated classroom, how it got better, how I knew like there were like how I knew the benefits of having a 50% ratio in the class and what I did about it. Like I started and founded many women in tech organizations that I still lead. And I spoke about my experience with them, like how I try to help. And it's all like, right? Like don't write about anything that you didn't. I don't know how much like I can stress on this, but really don't like if you think like, hey, here's a really cool thing that I want to write about in my essay, do that really cool thing and then write about it, right? Because then you have a lot more like firsthand things to say about the whole experience. Just speak to it very genuinely. You don't have to use like great words. It's just like you telling your story. Like, of course, you need to write it in like your grammar should be right and all of that, but it's not about like the words, it's about like what you're speaking about.
So the one other thing I would add is they give you very few words to write this essay. The MIT essay was 250 words. The other essays was around 400 words. And if you think about it, that's not enough to like tell you what you've done in your life. Like that's not enough at all. One strong recommendation is first look at the topic, think about it, and write down everything that comes to your mind, and then shorten it out. So never try to hit the word goal in your first attempt, because you'll end up missing a lot of important pieces. Rather, like write a comprehensive everything that comes to your mind. So my first essay for a 250 word essay was around 1,200 words. And I just wrote down everything I wanted to and used all the descriptive words I liked, because initially I thought like it needed to sound cool, right? But when I got to 250 in the end, you have to be as sharp as possible. And at that point, it was like I removed almost all the adjectives. There were actually very few adjectives in the whole essay. It was like, this is what I did, this is why I did it, and this is why I think it's going to help me. And that's the formula I used for all the examples. So initially, I wrote about, I come from this. I'm from a small village in Tamil Nadu, and that's a big part of why I think I want to do social entrepreneurship, because I want to help villages in India. And initially, I wrote a paragraph about that. And I remember in my final essay, that was one line. It was, I'm from this place, and this is why I want to do this. And that's it. And I had to move on. So it's important to like use the many revisions to cut down on the adjectives, on the big words, rather than like taking out material. So like, don't write it the first time and be like, I only have 400 words, I'm going to write about one thing. It's possible to fit many things into those 400 words if you just like start revising again and again, and be very concise and very factual. I think factual is the word I would use. Like try to steer away from descriptive words and subjective things, but rather like, this is what I did and this is why I want to do an MBA and stuff like that.
Yeah, very true. Aditya, do you want to also talk about Wharton a little bit? So Aditya has accepted an offer from Wharton, and Wharton offered their early admission for the first time to people outside the University of Pennsylvania this year. And I'd love to hear like more about like why you made this choice and what's Wharton known for.
Yeah, for sure. So of the schools I applied in, I was very keen on Stanford, actually, as someone who's interested in tech and entrepreneurship, and Stanford, Wharton, and also MIT. So I did not get into Stanford. They just didn't like me, I guess. But I was able to get into Yale, MIT, Columbia, and Wharton. And of these schools, MIT has a very tech-centric focus. So I would say hands down, if you're sure you want to do tech entrepreneurship, like a hardcore technical product or building something technical, I would say definitely MIT is a very, very good choice. For me, I'm living in Boston right now, so I actually live across MIT. So I didn't want to be in the same place. I wanted to go somewhere new. The Wharton program, I don't know if you guys have read about it, but they built this brand new entrepreneurship center, and it's really, really cool. And they also have a place in San Francisco where you can do like a semester abroad. That's also something that not a lot of people know. So that's why I ended up choosing Wharton over the other schools. And for me, it was not about the brand name. It was not about the job, changing the jobs and all of that. And like, you have to think about what is the reason for you, for why you want to do an MBA, because choosing a school is a very personalized choice. Like there's no like, this is the right school to go to. It depends on why you want to go to a school. So for me, for entrepreneurship, that seemed like the right decision. And I think this comes after the process, but what really helps is talking to people from those schools. So I reached out to a lot of people from all the schools, and more likely than not, they always say yes. They always have time to talk about their school. So it's just like you can cold email people. I use the Princeton network. I just saw like Princeton people who went to all these schools. And even otherwise, you can find like common interests, people from India who go to these schools. It's really easy to find them online, and you can just cold email them in a very nice way and ask them if they have time. And more likely than not, they say yes.
Adhitya is being very humble. Wharton actually ranks #1 today in business schools. So for those of you who haven't done your research, it's like one of the best places to be for an MBA and for business and entrepreneurship.
And if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me offline, and I can share resources about Wharton. I still haven't been to the school, so I have physically not been to the school, nor have I started studying there, so I can't speak to the experience. But from what I spoke to other people with, I can definitely share secondhand knowledge there.
In all of these top business schools, they all like focus on different things. You want to find out like what you care about and which school does that particular thing best. For example, like University of Chicago Booth focuses on finance. So if finance is something you really want to do, you're passionate about it, maybe like the ranking doesn't matter to you because you only care about which school is really good at finance, right? So definitely do your research. If you already know like clearly why you want to do an MBA, do your research and choose the school that's best at the field you care about. And don't just go by like, oh, this is rank #1, this is rank #2. That's great to apply to the top programs, but also like think through your decision. Yeah, Aditya, do you also want to share a little bit about your post-MBA goals, what you're doing now and what you think you'll do after the MBA? Like why an MBA in that sense?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm working at Bain and Company. It's a consulting firm. I am working at Boston because I really like Boston as a city, and it has a good squash program as well. For me, consulting happened very coincidentally. I didn't know it was an industry that existed until last year. But I always knew I wanted to do something business related. Since all my internships were highly technical, I worked as a hardware engineer, as a mechanical engineer. So I wanted to experience different fields. And for someone who is interested in entrepreneurship or business in general, I would highly recommend consulting, as you get exposure to a lot of different things. Like every 2 months, 3 months, your job basically changes. You're doing something completely different. So the learning curve is always very high. It's challenging. There are a lot of non-glamorous parts to it. It's like long hours and all of that. But if you're really in it for the right reasons, and if you just want to learn more about business, consulting is a good job to take up. That also ties to how it ties to the application process, right? And like I genuinely told them, this is why I want to do consulting, because I've done a technical background. I know I want to do a business degree, but in the interim period, I want to get real world experience and a broad exposure to different industries. And that's why I said consulting is the right job for me. And I was able to tie that into this one cohesive story. End of the day, you want to have like a single story as to like, this is why you're doing everything you're doing. And you tie it down to the same story again and again.
I don't have much experience in the consulting industry. I've only ever done like very technical, like software engineering roles, both for my internships and my full-time role. So I guess like I have a very different motivation for like why MBA. I think for me, it's literally just like learning the skill set, having formal business education. And I'm also like thinking about how my career might change post MBA. I think like some options I'm seriously considering is one, doing like a tech startup, because like an MBA like equips me with the skills to actually take an idea and start something and understand like all the aspects of it. Like I'm honestly like still considering coming back to big tech. Maybe like in product management or something in that area. I'm still not super sure how an MBA like fits with my career trajectory. But I'm sure like there are like great ways to go after that, where you can still maintain some level of technical skills in your job, but do something different. So like most people actually use an MBA to pivot careers. So if you're completely happy with where you are, I'm not sure if an MBA is like the great way for you to go. You really want to think about like 2 years and a lot of money, where that's kind of going to take your career.
You should really introspect hard on why you want to do an MBA. And especially coming from India, a lot of my school friends, they do a master's just because it's the common thing to do. And coming to the US seems like a cool idea. And I strongly disagree. I think like everyone has a goal or like a dream, and you should see if an MBA or a master's ties to that. And if it's not, like if you're like better progressing in the workforce, maybe that's what you should do. And for me, a big reason is I want to come back to India. I definitely want to come back after a couple of years, and MBA would help me like build a network in India and help me make that pivot at some point. So you should introspect really hard on why you want to do an MBA, because that's what will determine what you get out of it. Your reasons can be completely different, but be sure that you have a reason to do an MBA. And the common reasons are a career shift. I've seen a lot of people do it where like they started out as an engineer, they want to move into finance, and that's a very valid reason. That's a good reason to do an MBA. Or like me, like entrepreneurship or progressing in the same career into a more managerial role.
Cool. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. I think I got a couple of questions on chat, but I'm going to start going through the poll. We're already over time. I'm from an engineering background. What should I be doing in the 2 to 4 years of deferral period to increase my chance of getting accepted? The first thing is deferred. If you're looking at a deferred MBA, you actually get accepted, and then you do 2 to 4 years of deferral. And if you're looking at a regular MBA, you're going to like spend 2 to 4 years working and then apply. So I'm not sure if the person who asked this question is like aiming at a deferred MBA, but like if you already got accepted to a deferred MBA, then you have a lot more like choices on what you could do, because you just really have to have a full-time job, and like you have to work towards the goal for an MBA. Like you could do like consulting, you could do tech, you could basically do anything at a reasonable company, big or small, that kind of helps you gain the skills and the work experience you need before you go into a full-time business degree. So yeah, but if your question was, I'm going to apply for a regular MBA, what do I do in the 2 to 4 years? We're probably not great people to take that question. We only got into deferred MBA, but I think like they take a lot of people from like the traditional MBA paths, like consulting, investment banking, that sort of thing. But I think like some schools also like technical people. So if you have done like an engineering degree, as long as you can explain how MBA fits into your career, I think that's the most important thing. Should I focus on the essay more of a personal journey or the professional skills? Adhitya?
Professional skills should be the examples you use. Personal journey tells your whole story. So use the personal journey as the narrative, but don't go into examples in personal life. Use the professional skills as your examples, your internship, your academics, or your extracurriculars.
Can you guys share your essays so we can get some sort of idea on what tone and how concise and sharp your essays are?
The whole point of the essay is to be like, what is your story? And if you're trying to, like, our journeys are completely different, and it might actually lead you down the wrong path because you wouldn't be able to personally connect with what I've done. So if you have like specific questions, I'm more than happy to help with that.
I know it might seem like there's like an ideal essay to write to get in, and like there's a good essay versus a bad essay, but it's like, it's just like candidly like your journey, like the decisions you made and what you did throughout your life and what matters to you. Is not that much about the structure of the essay. It's actually what you have to say in it that matters more. Did you write different essays for your applications to different universities? If yes, how were they different and in what aspect? Adhitya?
Yes, as I mentioned, I wrote different essays to different applications because the questions were completely different. The examples I used, I have only done a few things in my life, so the examples I used would be similar, But the essay, for example, one would be about connecting the dots. I think for the Stanford essay, it was connecting the dots from your past. The MIT essay was use examples and show how you're going to be a leader in MIT. And for that, it's completely different questions. So you should definitely try to write different essays. Yeah. Yep.
What weightage does the essay hold against other things, like what place would I be working in during the deferred period or my college GPA?
Yeah, I think the weightage of the essay is around 30 to 40%. The big one that a lot of people tend to miss is essays and letter of recommendation. That actually holds a really, really big part. That's about 30% as well. Where you work in doesn't matter as much. It might help if it's a recognizable company, somewhere people know what it is or what they do, just because we're coming from India, so it gives some sort of credibility. But I never worked in a big company, and I'm sure they couldn't recognize those companies, and it doesn't really matter. I think a related question was internships at startups. Was it technical or management ones? I did fully technical internships, and the important part is having a clear reason as to why you did what you did. So I explained in my essay that I did fully technical ones because I wanted to improve my technical skills. And that's why I studied mechanical engineering. And through the internships, I realized that, oh, maybe I need to learn a little bit more about management. And that's why I want to do an MBA. So it's more about like why you did what you did and what you learned from that experience.
Cool. Am I competing against other applicants of deferred admission, or am I competing against everyone who applied to an MBA that year? The answer to that is only against deferred MBA applicants. Yeah, most schools like separate the two because there's a strong difference in applications. Like you don't have work experience, they do. So you're only competing against people who are also applying to deferred MBA. Coming from an engineering background, do I need to have a business or startup related projects to my name? Personally, the answer is no, you don't really need to have a business or a startup. I had like a startup idea when I applied, which I talked about briefly, but I think it was more about like decision making. Like if you talk about a startup, they'll ask you like about your experience with the startup, like what sort of idea you have, what market research you did, things like that. So it's more about like those things, which you can talk about even if you don't have a startup. You just need like some like project you did, some club you worked with, or something like that. Adhitya?
Getting into an MBA should never be a reason to creating a startup, firstly. Secondly, if you have a startup, definitely talk about it. That's super cool. Not many people do. I didn't, and I hope to. Although I did work on a few ideas, none of them materialized. And it's fine to talk about failures too. That's another thing where I candidly told them that I tried, I just didn't make it. And it died at an idea stage, and they were fine with it. A related question is, someone asked about recommendations, and if we've not done projects, how do we ask for recommendation letters? I think this is a big part that a lot of people miss, and this is not related to just MBAs, but everything you do after you graduate. From the start, try to build relationships with your professors, 2 or 3 people who you work closely with. It can be people from your job, your professors, or outside. For me, one of my recommendation letters was my squash coach because they know me best. They've been through my highs and lows. One of them was my thesis advisor who I've worked very closely with for a year. And the last one, usually it's only 2, but sometimes when they needed a third one, it was from one of the internships I worked with. And it was not like the CEO or anything, but the person I worked with very closely. The important part is this is someone who knows you as a person, who knows your interests, who knows your strengths. It shouldn't be a generic reference letter, and the name doesn't matter. So that's the key takeaway is if you're getting it from a famous person who doesn't know you at all, it's not as valuable as getting it from someone who knows you inside out.
There's one question that says, I have an average GPA as per Indian standards. Does low GPA mean I have less chance, or can I compensate for it? I think like GPA is a part of your application. Sometimes it could be used for like filtering, because in India, a lot of applicants, you might be competing against a lot of people and they don't have time to read like everything about everyone. But that being said, as long as you justify the low GPA, I think like it doesn't really hurt your chances. Like you could have a low GPA for a number of reasons. One could be that you're not hardworking, but the other could be like you had like a major life event during the time and that like caused your GPA to tank, right? And those are two very different things. So be sure, like if you know that's a low GPA, then they probably know too. So try to justify like why you had the GPA, what your life looked at that point, and like how you've done better after that. And as long as you have that, I think you're still good to go. Aditya, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think you covered that pretty well. I think it's important to address it rather than just let it be and hope that they don't notice it, because that will not happen. And it's also important not to give reasons or sound like excuses, like this is why I wasn't able to do it, but rather the way I would phrase it is, this is what happened, this is why my GPA went down, and then spend the majority of the time on what did you learn from it and how has it improved, or like show a growth trajectory. Like for me, my first year GPA at college was really, really bad. And that's something I addressed. I said that I was new to the US. I had no idea what's going on. And I was really shocked by the social culture. So my GPA tanked. And then over time, I got better at it and showed that my GPA improved. And that it's important to show what happened after and not just leave it at my GPA was bad and that's it.
On a related note, like a couple of questions, what might be considered as a decent GPA? Is 3.4 too low to aim for Ivy League? Average GPA starts from 3.6.
I'm more than happy to admit that my GPA was a 3.45. And I'm not a great student, but I was interested in a lot of other things, and I was genuinely interested in the projects I did. So the GPA, I think, is a minimum threshold. If you have anything above a 3.3 or a 3.4, you should be fine as long as you have a valid reason. And that's not a bad GPA.
Yeah, and I think like GPA is also like something that varies across schools. Some schools like curve up GPA, some schools are like more harsh. So like your GPA is relative to your colleagues. Like if 10 people apply from your school and your GPA is relatively lower compared to them, I think that's when like it deserves like an explanation. But like, for example, like Carnegie Mellon, where I did my undergrad, does not curve GPAs at all. It's not inflated at all. So getting a high GPA is really hard. And I think my professor definitely like emphasized on that in her recommendation.
Yes.
How is the process for deferred MBA different from regular MBA? We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but I think the main thing is like whether or not you have work experience. That's how the application itself will differ. I think the process is pretty much the same. The format of the and everything is exactly identical. What are the chances of getting accepted to a deferred program? Is it more difficult? The percentage, the admit percent is actually the same across both of them. You're just competing with a different pool of applicants. And usually like fewer people apply to the deferred MBA, but they're like pretty competitive. So it's equally hard, I would say. And it's good to do it if you have the opportunity. I'm from a research background. How will this affect my application as job and internships are of engineering? So I don't know if you're applying for the deferred MBA, but if you're applying for the deferred MBA, all you mention about like your full-time job is like where you're headed if you have that offer. So like what you do for 2 to 4 years doesn't matter for your deferred MBA because you already like got admitted. But if you're asking about the regular MBA, I think that's totally fine. Actually, I did all my internships at Facebook. So I was a software engineer, highly technical. I'm doing my full-time role at Google where I'm working on machine learning, also very technical. I don't have a lot of business background. And I think the important takeaway here is don't emphasize something in your essays or your interviews which you're not good at, right? Like if I went and told them I'm like really good at negotiation and I have great management experience and I manage like teams of 20, they're going to ask me which team of 20, what was the setbacks you had and what did you learn from management? And those are hard questions to answer if you haven't really done that, right? So I think like stress on what you're really good at. I actually stressed on the fact that I'm highly technical and I'm really good at what I do. And I think that's really important. Don't be scared that you're applying to like a business program and you're talking about computer science. They want to know what you're good at. They want to know your strengths. So tell them that you're really good at your job.
Yeah, 100% agree to that. as long as you have the natural question is, okay, you did all these research, like why suddenly do you want to do an MBA? And if you have a valid answer for why you did the research and why you're going to do the MBA, that's good enough. I also emphasized on my technical skills because I said that all these people who are going to come from an economics background maybe, and I'm going to be that technical person who's going to help them think differently and build stuff. So you should like play to your strengths. And if you've done research, you can definitely talk about how research is going to bring you in with a very different perspective of like experimenting, for example. That's not something people in management do. So yeah, just talk about your strengths and why you want to do the MBA. The closing thought is, in terms of the MBA process, I was not a great student and I was not like exceptional at anything. I just had really good help. So play to your strengths and don't be afraid to apply. I've seen a lot of friends who just don't apply because they feel they're not good enough. Like worst case, you get rejected and you can apply again, and that's it. So would highly recommend on applying to the process.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adhitya, for taking the time to like share your experience. Yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions. There are a lot of questions. We hope you can like join us again sometime. We'll talk about a different topic, maybe like LORs. You can reach out to me via email. I've tried my best to accept the LinkedIn request, but if I didn't accept it, cancel it, send it with a note. Thank you so much for like showing up today and sharing your time with us. And like send me an email with feedback, comments, concerns, anything. Cool. Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.